I'll forget you in a week. I've already found someone better. She said it loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear, then tossed her engagement ring into the salad bowl like it was trash. Her cousin laughed. Her mother nodded in relief. Me, I just wiped my mouth with a napkin, looked straight into her eyes, and smiled, 'cause Emily Mason had no idea what was coming for her. My name is Mark Reed, and 6 months ago, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with threw her engagement ring into a bowl of Caesar salad in front of her entire family. She told me I was nothing but a grease monkey dragging her down. She said she'd forget me in a week because she'd already found someone on her level, whatever that meant. Her mother nodded like a bobblehead, and her cousin laughed so hard wine came out of his nose. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table or throw a punch. I just wiped my mouth, stood up, and walked out without looking back. And then I did something she never expected. Something that would unravel everything she'd carefully built. Like a timing belt snapping on a hot summer day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the moment I first saw Emily Mason and made the biggest miscalculation of my 32 years on this planet. It was the Fall Festival in Flagstaff, Colorado, the kind of small-town event where everyone knows everyone, and strangers stick out like a chrome bumper on a rusty pickup. The air smelled of roasted almonds, wood smoke, and early winter drifting down from the mountains. I was standing next to my booth at the vintage car show, wiping my hands on an old shop rag while families wandered past restored Mustangs and the occasional expensive European import some guy trailered up from Denver just to show off. My project car was there, a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SSI, already spent 3 years restoring. The interior was still bare metal, but the engine and numbers, matching L6 454 I rebuilt from the crankshaft up, was perfect. When I started her for the crowd, the rumble vibrated through everyone's chest. That's the thing about big block American muscle. It doesn't whisper. It announces itself like thunder. I was explaining the restoration to an older gentleman when I noticed her walking toward me from across the fairgrounds. She wore a camel-colored coat that looked expensive and completely wrong for the muddy conditions. She picked her way through the crowd like she was afraid regular people were contagious. Her makeup was flawless, not a hair out of place, and she was shivering hard enough to crack. Most guys would have been thinking up pickup lines. I was thinking she was about to get pneumonia because she chose fashion over warmth. That's my fly diagnose problems even when nobody asks. She stopped at my display, arms wrapped around herself, pretending to be interested in the She clearly didn't know a carburetor from a catalytic converter, but she asked polite questions to keep me talking while she hid from the wind behind my trailer. After 5 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I took off my leather jacket, my father's old one, still smelling like the shop where I learned everything I know, and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at me with big brown eyes, surprised, and for a moment I saw something genuine beneath all that armor, something vulnerable, something that made me want to protect her. That was my first mistake, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. Her name was Emily Mason, and she worked at a PR agency in Denver. She was in Flagstone, scouting locations for a corporate retreat, the kind where executives pretend to rough it while drinking wine that costs more than my utility bill. She found my jacket charming and my rugged authenticity fascinating, which I now know is what people say when they're already planning how to package you for their own use. We exchanged numbers, and 3 days later she called. We met at Hank's Diner, a greasy little spot off the highway. She arrived overdressed and uncomfortable with the vinyl booths and the waitress who called everyone honey. But she stayed. 3 hours we talked. I told her about restoration, about the satisfaction of saving something broken, about engines that sound like a symphony when tuned right. Looking back, she wasn't listening to my words. She was watching how I looked at her, calculating, storing my attention like a currency. But I thought she saw past the calluses and grease stains to the real me. I thought she was the bright splash of color in my gray life. The truth is, I was lonely. My father had died 2 years earlier, leaving me the shop and everything he taught me. My mum had moved to Arizona with her new husband, and we drifted apart. I had friends, but not the kind who would miss me if I disappeared for a while. Emily showed up like a sports car at a classic car, meat flashy, exciting, completely different. Of course, I fell for her. We dated 8 months before she moved in. Well, moved us into a new rental house in a nicer neighborhood, one she chose because it was presentable. The rent was double what I'd been paying, but she promised we'd split it. And the place had a 3-car garage. So I convinced myself it was fine. I ignored the warning signs. The nose wrinkles when I came home smelling like work. The digs about my clothes or music. The fact she never once visited Reed's Customs, the shop my father built and I inherited. She drove past it sometimes, but she never stepped inside. But love makes you stupid, and I was stupidly in love. When I finally proposed, I did it the only way I knew how, with a vintage ring that cost me 4 months of savings, designed. Style because I thought it suited her old-fashioned beauty with a modern sparkle. I took her to the overlook on Flagstone Pass, where you can see 3 mountain ranges at once, and the sunset paints the sky in colors you won't find anywhere else on earth. I got down on one knee in the gravel, my heart pounding harder than it ever had, and I asked her to marry me. She said yes. She cried. She wrapped her arms around me and told me I was everything she'd ever wanted. For about 30 seconds, I was the happiest man in Colorado. Then we started planning the wedding, and I began to understand exactly what kind of life I'd signed up for. Emily didn't want a wedding. She wanted a production, an elaborate spectacle, designed to impress people who would dissect every flower, every plate, every song for signs of cheapness or poor taste. She wanted orchids flown in from Ecuador because local ones weren't good enough. She wanted a photographer from New York, not because she liked his work, but because hiring someone from New York said something about who she wanted people to think she was. She wanted a reception venue that charged more per guest than some people make in a week. She wanted it all booked immediately because deposits were not refundable, and she couldn't risk losing her ideal dates. One night, I sat down with her and showed her the numbers. I had a spreadsheet because that's how I handle things. I showed her the cost of the wedding, what we had in savings, and what we needed for a house down payment. The math was brutal. If we did it her way, we'd start our marriage in debt, still renting, with no safety net. She looked at that spreadsheet like I'd handed her something. Rotten, you don't understand, she said, and there was something in her voice I had never heard before: contempt. This is my day, the most important day of my life. You want me to look cheap? You want people to think I'm marrying down. Marrying down, the words hit harder than a wrench to the skull. I asked what she meant, and she immediately backpedaled, said she was stressed. Didn't mean it, of course she didn't think. She was better than me, but the words stayed in the air like toxic fumes. I agreed to the expensive wedding because I was still foolish enough to believe that making her happy would eventually make us happy. I took extra work at the shop, stayed until midnight, finishing rush jobs, worked through weekends, skipped lunches, ranked myself ragged, trying to afford the life she scripted for us. Meanwhile, Emily forgot her half of the rent for 3 months straight, always with new excuses. Unexpected work expenses, outfits. These amazing shoes were on sale, such a good deal. It would have been irresponsible not to buy them. I found those shoes in the trunk of her car when I was changing her oil, still in the box, hidden under a gym bag she never used because sweating was for other people. $800. I looked it up because I needed proof my eyes weren't lying. $800, that should have gone toward our life, sitting in her trunk like contraband. That was when the diagnostic part of my brain kicked in. The mechanic part. The part that spots a problem before it becomes a disaster. I started noticing things. The new password on her phone, the cologne on her clothes, that wasn't mine. The unexplained mileage on her car, 50 extra miles on days she claimed she was at the office. I didn't confront her. That would give her space to spin a story, play the victim, call me controlling. Instead, I did what I do best. I gathered information, I pulled bank statements and created a timeline of every expense, photographed receipts, saved screenshots of her promises to pay her share, filed everything in a metal lockbox in my shop's safe right next to my father's watch and the title to the Chevelle. I acted like nothing was wrong. I needed the whole picture before I decided how to fix it. The answer came 3 weeks later. Her parents' dinner party. Her parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every house looks alike and everyone pretends their lives are perfect. Gerald, her father, was a mid-level insurance manager who behaved like a CEO. Patricia, her mother, was a professional socialite whose favorite pastime was judging people she thought were beneath her. They had never liked me. Gerald inspected my calloused hands like I was contagious. Patricia helpfully suggested careers I might pursue if I ever wanted to better myself. The table was set with crystal and silver because dinner at the Mason house was always theater. Emily's cousin Derek was there, with his timid wife, who agreed with everything Patricia said. Emily's grandmother, sharp-eyed woman, who built the family fortune with pure ruthlessness, sat at the head of the table, watching everything. The conversation was the usual bragging and subtle insults. Derek's new boat, Patricia's trip to Europe, Gerald's golf game. Nobody asked me anything. Fine by me. Then Emily tapped her fork against her wine glass. She was drunk. I saw it immediately, the flushed cheeks, the slight slur, but nobody else cared. She stood, swaying, and announced she had something important to say. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Everyone, she said, too loudly. I need to be honest with all of you. And with Marky here, Marky Dot. She had never called me that. No one had. I've been struggling for months, pretending I could go through with this wedding, pretending I was happy settling for this. She gestured at me like I was an end table that didn't match her decor. The truth is, I deserve better. Someone who understands my world. Someone who moves in the right circles. Someone who doesn't come home smelling like a gas station. Silence. I could hear the mantel clock ticking. I've met someone, she continued, smiling her practiced presentation-ready smile. Someone who sees my potential. Someone who's going places. Staying with Mark would be the biggest mistake of my life. So I'm ending it right here, right now. Because Emily Mason is done settling. She ripped off her engagement ring. The ring I spent months saving for, and threw it across the table. It landed in the salad bowl with a soft plop, sinking into Caesar dressing. Derek laughter snorting. Awful sound. Patricia looked relieved. Gerald nodded like this was the outcome he'd always wanted. And Emily looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'll forget you in a week. I've already found someone better." I want to tell you I was devastated. That my heart shattered. That I fought back tears. But that's not what happened. What happened was cold, calm, mechanical. It was like a check engine light finally illuminating after months of strange noises. Suddenly, every symptom made sense. Every inconsistency. Every warning sign. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't heartbroken. I was diagnosed. I wiped my mouth slowly, met her gaze until she squirmed, then said, in the calmest voice I've ever used, "All right then. You've made your choice." I stood, nodded politely to the grandmother, only person there who treated me with respect. Walked out. I didn't go to a bar, didn't call a friend, didn't go home that house had. Never felt like mine. I drove to Reed's Customs, where the air smelled like oil and honesty. The Chevelle was waiting in the bay and finished. Like my life, I sat beside her, rested my hand on her cold metal fender, and made a plan. Because here's what mechanics know. Every problem has a solution if you're willing to put in the work. Be patient, be methodical, get all the information before you start tearing things apart. I opened the safe and took out the lockbox, months of documents, telling the true story of my relationship with Emily Mason. Bank statements showing I'd paid 100% of rent and utilities for 6 months, credit card receipts for wedding expenses all charged to me, screenshots of her promises to pay me back, contracts making both of us financially liable for non-refundable deposits. I spread everything across my workbench and made lists. Who was owed what, where the money went, how deep the damage went by sunrise. I had the full picture, and it was worse than I imagined. Emily hadn't just broken promises, she'd been using our joint accounts as her personal piggy bank, hiding purchases and covering her tracks by delaying her share until I got desperate enough to pay it myself. Mark Reed, a hard-working mechanic in Colorado, discovers that his fiancée Emily has not only been neglecting her share of their finances, but has been secretly using his money to fund her affair. After she breaks up with him in a humiliating scene in front of her family, he uncovers the financial records and evidence of her betrayal, ultimately suing her in small claims court for over $12,000, despite Emily trying to manipulate him through angry calls, threats, guilt, and promises. Mark remains steady. He carefully documents everything, cuts off her financial access, and prepares his case in court. Emily's high-powered lawyer attempts to portray Mark as controlling and abusive, but Mark's meticulous evidence contradicts every claim. Under pressure from the judge, Emily is forced to reveal that her affair was with Brian Hollister, her boss's married son. This revelation destroys her credibility and detonates her professional life. Mark wins the case completely. Emily's affair becomes a scandal that costs her her job, reputation, friends, and social standing. Meanwhile, Mark's reputation in town improves. His business grows, and he begins quietly dating someone kind and stable named Sandra. Months later, a broken and humbled Emily shows up at Mark's shop begging for another chance. Mark refuses, explaining that the rust in her character is too deep. It can't simply be painted over. The story ends with Mark peacefully moving forward, grounded in his work, his restored muscle cars, new relationships, and the knowledge that he has finally let go. Emily lives with the consequences of her choices. Mark lives with freedom.